Hello, everyone. Welcome back to dinanddaf. This is Elana Stein Hain, and I'm going to start with a few questions. Question one, and I hope this never happens, but let's say you are cooking something that is meat, and I throw some milk into the pot. Have I made the meat not kosher? Well, presumably, if the ratios are such that there is less than 60 times as much meat to the milk that I put in, then yes, I have made that non-kosher. Let me ask a different question. Let's say I walk up to your cow and I decide to bow to it as a pagan object. Have I now turned that cow into avodah zara, and therefore you can no longer derive any benefit from it? Hmm. Well, maybe this one is different because I didn't actually change anything about the cow. Okay. What if I, what if that cow was standing in front of or kneeling in front of some sort of avodah zara and I slaughtered it for the sake of that avodah zara? Now have I rendered your cow prohibited for your benefit? Right? There's a second question. Is it the same as the milk in the meat? Is it different? Another question. We're not allowed to plant grains and grapes within a certain proximity of each other. It's a kilayim. It's a type of mixture, forbidden mixture. Let's say you have your wheat growing and I decide to plant my grapes right over them. Have I now made your wheat prohibited because of kilayim? Have I now made my grapes prohibited because of kilayim? How would you answer that question? So all of these questions partake of the following query. Can I prohibit someone else's item by doing something in regards to it or by doing something to it or not? And some of the question, like what's behind the issue, I think there are two things that are behind the issue. The first is, oh, well, ownership has to mean something. So if you own something and I'm trying to render it prohibited by doing something that you don't want me to do, then maybe your being against it is problem enough, right? Or alternatively, maybe what's done is done, right? In the milk and meat, I don't think anybody would say in the milk and meat situation that we don't have a kashrut problem or a kashrut question on our hands. And yet the Gemara in Chullin on 40a and b, Mem Aleph and Mem Bet, does talk about what happens if somebody bows to somebody else's cow, or better yet, what happens if somebody shechts, somebody slaughters somebody else's cow um, for the sake of avodah zarah? Have they rendered it asur? So I want to talk about this whole concept of ein adam oser davar she'eno shelo. A person does not prohibit something, does not render prohibited something that doesn't belong to them. And some people may have heard just the parallel concept, right? Ein davar makdish, ein adam makdish davar she'eno shelo. A person can't make something hektish that doesn't belong to them. They can't make something consecrated that doesn't belong to them. It's an interesting parallel, kind of a mirror image of the two. But let's jump into our sources. Okay. So first we have our Gemara in Chullin, Mem Amud Aleph. Two places I'm going to quote here. Amar Rav Huna said, Hayta be'emat chavero revutza lifnei avodah zara. Your fellow person's animal happens to be sitting in front of some sort of idol. Kevan sheshachat basiman echad asara. Once you, the person who doesn't own the animal, cut one of the two simanim, you have already rendered it prohibited, meaning you have turned this animal, because it's for the sake of avodah zarah, you've turned this animal into something that is asura b'hana'ah, that cannot be benefited from, because it is something given to avodah zarah. And the Gemara continues, Savar la kihada amar ula amar Rabbi Yochanan. Clearly, Rav Huna, in saying this, that I am able to render prohibited my friend's cow by slaughtering it for avodah zarah, he must agree with what Ula says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, which is, even though they said that one who bows to their friend's cow, they have not rendered it an idolatry cow, so they have not made it off limits, prohibited from benefit. But asaba ma'aseh, if you actually did something to the cow, like slaughtering it, asara, you have prohibited it. Right? So already our first wrinkle, which is, ein adam oser davar she'eno shelo, a person cannot make somebody else's thing prohibited unless they actually do a ma'aseh. They actually do an action in that thing. And if they do that action in that thing, why is that? Is that because, well, what's happened has already happened? Or is doing the action rendering some sort of ownership to the person who's doing it, right, in some way? Now, on the next Amud, on the next side, Chullin Mem Amud Bet, 40b, we have Rav Nachman, Rav Amram, Rav Yitzchak Amri. These three Amoreim say, Ein adam moser davar she'eno shelo. No, a person cannot render prohibited something that doesn't belong to them, implying even if you do a maaseh, even if you do an action, right? So this is actually how the Rambam paskins. When you look up the Maimonides' ruling on this, he basically says you can't render somebody else's stuff asur, right? So here's our machloket. Now I want to look at what's behind the machloket, okay? So in order to look at what's behind the machloket, I actually want to look at a few Rishonim, a few medieval commentators, on a different Gemara where this comes up, okay? The Gemara in avodah zara, Nun Gimel Amud Bet, 53b. We have an interesting case. Ki had Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, that which Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav, Yisrael shezakaf ve'ina lihishtachavot la. Let's say a Jew stands up a brick that they are about to bow to as idolatry. Uva goy v'hishtachavah, and a non-Jew comes and bows to it. Then what happens? Asara, that non-Jewish person who bowed to it has made it avodah zara and has now made it prohibited. Now, parentheses, what about the idea that you're not allowed to render prohibited something that doesn't belong to you? Well, let's see. Amar Rabbi Elazar, minal and asara, sorry. From where do we know that it should be that the Gentile bound to it makes it prohibited? Amar Rabbi Elazar says, actually, kitchila shel Eretz Yisrael. It follows the pattern of the beginning of the first conquest of the land of Canaan by the Israelites. To Amar Rachmana, Torah says, Ashereim tisrafun ba'esh, that you have to burn their Asherah trees, meaning their trees that they had been worshipped for idolatry. You have to burn them. And the Gemara says, that's so weird. Mechdi, let's see, Yerushahim lahem me'aboteim. According to the Bible, according to the Torah, the land of Israel is already the inheritance of the Israelites because it was promised to Abraham. So it's already theirs, that land, meaning even the trees are already theirs. And a person is not allowed to render prohibited something that doesn't belong to them. So how could you possibly say that the Asherah trees, the trees that have been worshipped as idolatry by the Gentile nations that were living in Canaan at the time, how could that be a problem for the Jews? The Jews already, in their own understanding, own it, and somebody else is using it and using it for idolatry, but that shouldn't matter. So the Gemara continues and says, well, and if you're going to say, well, actually, no. What we're talking about are things that were worshipped even in the time of Abraham, before he got the promise of the land. So it belonged to those non-Jews who were worshiping it. Bivitula ba'alma sagilu. Okay, so just be mevatel it. Let them just render it nullified. So what exactly is the reason to have to burn down these Asherah trees? Ella midafalchu Yisrael le'egel. Rather, from the fact that the Jewish people worshipped the golden calf, meaning they did idolatry themselves. Galu ada'ataihu, they've shown denichelu b'avodah zara, that they're very happy about doing paganism. V'chi'atu goyim, and when the Gentiles in Canaan went and worshipped the trees that biblically the Jews view as something that they are going to be inheriting from Abraham, shlichuta didhu avde, they're basically doing the emissaryship of the Jews. Meaning, it's not as though it's not as though they're rendering somebody else's Asherah, a tree into an Asherah. The Jews themselves wanted it. Hachinami, likewise, Yisrael shezakaf levena, a Jew who stands up a brick to worship it. Kal yadate denichale b'avodah zara. They've shown they're very happy with paganism. And if a non-Jew comes and scoops them and worships it instead, it's like they're doing what the Jew wanted them to do. So this is very, very, very interesting because it starts to get into the question of why ein adam oser davar she'eino shelo, right? Why and when. And I want to be very clear because I do think it's important when reading certain Gemarot. I want to be very clear. What you do in a contemporary context with a mitzvah like burn down their Asherah trees, that's a separate sheer, right? To think about what that looks like today in an age of more religious tolerance and less paganism and all that. But just, I want to note the sensitivity to it rather than just glossing over it. But so the question is here, okay, so if you tell me, ein adam oser davar she'eino shelo, right? A person should not be able to prohibit something that is not theirs. And let's take what our Gemara in Chullin said. You didn't do any masa to it. You didn't do anything to it. You bowed to it. You didn't do anything to it, right? But then we say, well, actually, if you knew that the Jew wanted you to do it or was happy that you did it, then you can make it asur to them because they wanted you to do that avodah zara. So what does that mean? How does that fix it? Not fix it, I mean, it makes it worse. But how does it allow somebody to render something that doesn't belong to them prohibited as what's the word? An item of avodah zara. So Rashi says, what do you mean? Shlichutayu avdi, they were doing the Jews, they were basically doing the job for the Jews. Hilka chavya avodat kochvim shel Yisrael. It's as though this was actually the paganism of the Jews. Ve'ena b'tila olamit, and it can never be nullified because it belongs to a Jew. Avodah zara that belongs to a Jew can't be nullified. Meaning, what do you mean? It was like the non-Jew wasn't doing something that didn't belong to them. They were doing something that as though belonged to them because shlucho shel adam kamoto. They're doing their shlichut, they're doing their emissaryship. Now, never mind, parentheses, the question of whether the concept of shlucho shel adam kamoto, a person's shaliach, a person's emissary is just like themselves, actually applies in the case of Jew to non-Jew. Never mind that. The concept here is basically saying, no. Everything belonged to the Jew here. The item belonged to the Jew. The actual pagan act belonged to the Jew. So everything belonged to the Jew. So in some ways, what it's really saying is, look, it's all about ownership, right? But the Tosfot Rid, Rabbi Yeshaya Detrani, 13th century Italy, he says, no. It's not literally shlichut, and not literally emissaryship. Ava shlichut tahacha eno ela hochacha ba'alma. No. This is just proof. The idea of saying that they were doing the bidding of the Jews because they had worshipped the golden calf, so clearly they didn't mind avodah zara. It's saying this is evidence de birtzono uvda, that it's according to the will of the owner. The person is worshiping it, v'hu marshehu, and they're allowing it. The Jew is allowing it. V'lo mishtare mishum dehave davar she'ena shelo, and it doesn't become something that's okay. Meaning, oh no, this is not a pagan object because it didn't belong to the non-Jew to begin with. Saying no. The reason why we say in adam oser davar she'eno shelo a person can't, a person can't, what's it called? A person can't render prohibited, something that is not theirs, is because we assume there's somebody on the other end saying, you can't do that. They might not literally be saying it, but that's what they feel, right? And that X cancels out whatever action this other party is doing, right? For Rashi, it's not that somebody doesn't want, it's you have to have ownership. And if you're actually like somebody's shaliach, it's as though you're the owner because you're doing it for the shaliach, right? You're doing it as a shaliach, something like that. Now, I think, by the way, an interesting difference between these two approaches is what if there is no owner? What if it's just sitting there, right? Somebody finds something sitting there and bows to it, right? Is it now problematic? If there was no owner saying no, then, maybe you can make it a sur because there's nobody saying no. Or is it, no, you have to actually own it in order to make it a sur, right? So it's a good questions. So this is in the realm of avodah zara. I'm also curious where else this might apply, right? So far we have this idea, in adam oser davar she'eino shelo, maybe because you require ownership over something to impact it, maybe because the other party it doesn't want you specifically to do it, and all of this within a rubric perhaps of there was no maaseh done, but maybe if you did a maaseh, you can overcome it. Well, it's interesting to note that even before we have this concept of in adam oser davar she'eino shelo, we actually have a very similar concept in discussing kilayim. And this was the third question that I asked you. Grapes and grain together. The Mishnah in Kilayim, Perek Zayin, Mishnah Daled says, "Hamesakech et gafneo agabei tuato shel chaveroi." If somebody causes their own vine to hang over the grain of somebody else, hareze kidesh. You've actually caused that grain to become prohibited. V'chayav v'achrayuto. And you also have to pay for it, right? Because now it has to be burned because it's killing. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon Omrim, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon said, no, ein adam mekadesh davar she'eino shelo. Nope, you cannot render this thing prohibited as kilayim, this grain, because it doesn't belong to you. Now, why is that, right? We don't see that everywhere. And by the way, to me, it sounds a lot like throwing milk in somebody's, pot of steak, right? Okay. So Rabbi Vagda Bartanura gives a reason. He says, well, let me tell you. A person cannot render here prohibited. Mekadesh here means prohibited because of the language of the pasuk there, if it doesn't belong to them. This is not like other prohibitions in the Torah. I put prohibited fats, or I put blood in my friend's pot of food. Or I took your milk and meat and I cooked them together. Of course, those things become prohibited. The shiny kilayim, but the case of mixed grain and grapes is different. Because it's written regarding them in Devarim, Perek of Bet, Lo tizra karmecha kilayim. You shall not plant your vineyard with these mixtures. Demashma, it sounds like karmecha velo kerem acher. Your vineyard and not somebody else's. Meaning it sounds like from the pasuk itself, it's not a general principle of ein adam oser davar she'eino shelo. It's specific to kilayim, that it has to be your kerem, your prohibition. V'Rabbanan Amri, and what are the rabbis hold? Meaning, what is Tanakama, the first opinion that says that it actually does render the grain prohibited? What do they think? They say, Lo tizra karmecha, you shouldn't plant your vineyard. Ein li el karmecha, you would think that it only applies if you're doing it to your own vineyard. Kerem acher minayin, what about somebody else's? Talmud Lomar, therefore it says, kilayim, it's a mixture, mikol makom. No matter what, it's a mixture, whether it's a mixture of your stuff or it's a mixture of your stuff with somebody else's stuff. And by the way, says Obadi Bar Tanura, ve'ein halacha Rabbi Yossi v'lo Rabbi Shimon v'lo Rabbi Akiva. And the halacha actually doesn't follow those who say you don't render the other grain prohibited. And the Rabbi Akiva is in the following Mishnah. Right? So interesting this conversation, but I want to add one more thing because there are some who say, why would you even have said that you could not prohibit the other person's grain? Not just because of the pasuk. Maybe because kilayim actually relates to someone's kavana, relates to someone's intention. For example, you look at the Mishnah in Kilayim, Perek Hey, Mishnah Vav, Hara'eh Yerek Bakerem, somebody sees in their vineyard that they have something growing there that shouldn't be growing there, a grain. Amar, and they say, Kishagielo alaktenu, when I get to it, I will pull it out. Mutar, that's fine, because the point is, I'm on my way. I'll get to it. I don't want it there. But kishe'echzor alaktenu, when I say, oh, if I come back, meaning they get to it, they don't pull it out. And then they say, when I come back, I'll take it out. Im hosif b'matayim asur. If it grows a certain amount, and we're not going to deal with that right now, it actually does become asur. Why? Because it actually has to do with your intention. So maybe dafka, maybe specifically in adam mekadesh davar she'eno shelo, a person does not render unfit as kilayim, something that doesn't belong to them, actually relates to the fact that kilayim itself has to engage the intention of the planter to either allow the kilayim to stay or to plant them in the first place. And if somebody else is the one who caused it to become a mixture, they obviously didn't have that intention, right? So what kind of overlap does that have with the general concept of ein adam oser davar she'eno shelo? It's an interesting question. But I want to end by bringing up three other places in Halakha where people, and I'm sure there are many others, it's just interesting to consider, where posts can bring up the concept of ein adam oser davar she'eno shelo. A person cannot render unfit somebody else's stuff. And some of these are cases where the person didn't actually do a maaseh, they didn't actually do an action to the object itself. And some of these they actually did. So it's an interesting consideration to see how often, when do we say in adam oser davar she'eno shelo, even if somebody did an action within the object, they did something to change the object, or not to change the object. Let's just say it did an action to the object. Let's just put it that way. So first is the Avnei Nezer, of Avraham Bornstein. And he says, he's actually quoting the Nota B'Yehuda. Umikan nearly raya berura l'divrei HaNota B'Yehuda. I think the Nota B'Yehuda was right. The gazal chametz. Let's say somebody stole my chametz. V'avra lava Pesach. And Pesach, it continued to exist over Pesach. Is this chametz aser to me? Chametz she'avar lava Pesach, right? Is this chametz aser to me? Da chametz mutter la'achar haPesach. Nope, the chametz is totally fine for me, the person who got stolen from. It's fine for me to eat or derive benefit from after Pesach, right? Yayin Sham, you should check it out. Ta'ati Allah mishum ein oser davar she'eno shelo. Why? Because somebody else does not have the power to render something of mine prohibited from benefit, right? It's an interesting case, right? I do want to point out that there wasn't any change to the object here, right? Meaning the chametz still looks like the chametz, presumably. Another example in the Shulchan Aruch, when it's talking about the halachot of netilat yadayim, of ritual hand washing, and which mayim, which water is invalid to wash one's hands in. So an example of invalid water for hand washing, asaba mayim malacha, o sheshara behem pito, right? If a person did labor using that water, and I think there's supposed to be an O, aleph, I'll have to go back and fix that. I was trying to get rid of all of the little superscripts, and I think I accidentally got rid of a word. Or the person soaked their bread in that water, right? Or nitkaven even if nitkaven lishrot beklizev nafal lasheni, even if they actually wanted to soak their bread in some other water and it fell into this, psulim, that's invalid. So the Birkei Yosef, known as the Chida, or Chaim Yosef Azulai, he says, oh, I want you to notice something. Oh, sheshara behem pito, if somebody puts their own bread to soak in water, it's a problem. But Im Reuven shara pito b'mayim shel Shimon. What if Reuven, or I'll say for us, meaning for me, Rachel, puts her bread in the water that belongs to Leah? So Laman Amr, according to the opinion, and Adam Oser Davar She'eno Shelo, a person cannot render prohibited something that doesn't belong to them. And notice this is probably the more expansive version of Ein Adam Oser Davar She'eno Shelo, which is even if you did a maaseh, even if you did an action in the object itself, Hamaim Sherim, the water would be kosher. The water would be valid for Nitzilat Yadayim. Aval Laman Amar Adam Oser Davar She'eno Shelo Yesh Lachmir. But the side that would say, no, 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 you actually can render prohibited. And I don't know if he's saying render prohibited because you did a masa, you did an action with the water itself, or just in general that you can render prohibited. They would say you should really view this as invalid water. So that's the second thing. And the last one actually had to do with a burial. And there's a discussion about what things are prohibited from benefit. So a dead body, the shrouds of the dead body, also anything that is thrown in and touches the beer, it becomes something we're worried that you'll confuse it with the shrouds, with the tachrichim, so it becomes asur bana'ah. So what happens, meaning prohibited from benefit? So what happens if, and I want to look for, it's amazing. What happens if, here we go. Ein adam oser davar she'eino shelo, a person cannot render prohibited from benefit something that does not belong to them. Lefichach, therefore, hapores al hamet davar she'eino shelo. Let's say somebody takes something, I don't know, think a sheet, and puts it over the deceased. But they don't own that sheet. The person who put it on doesn't own that sheet. Does that sheet become prohibited from benefit? Can it be removed and washed and used later? So here what we find out is from the Tur, 14th century, Tur Shulchan Aruch, afilu lekov robo, even if they put that sheet on the deceased to bury them, enon esar, it doesn't become asur b'hana'ah, it doesn't become prohibited from benefit. So there you have it. This concept that we learn about when it comes to avodah zara, it seems to be kind of an interesting question, right? It's like an ends means question, right? In the end, there's now, milk in the meat. So of course it's not kosher. But wait a second. In the end, there also are grapes near these grains. And yet there's an opinion that says that doesn't affect the grains. Now, parenthetically, people say, well, even according to the opinion that says it doesn't affect the grains, it would affect the grapes. And the grapes would actually become asurim, right? Or do we say that it's really about the means, which is if a person wanted it or didn't want it, the owner wanted it or didn't want it, that's what matters. And by the way, we'll never say that with basar b'chalav, milk and meat, but might we say it in some of these other examples? And then what the person wanted matters, and or owning it is actually what matters and allows you to do something that has an impact. But hopefully it just makes you take a step back and think about the question of what ownership, what kind of responsibility and privilege ownership allows when it comes to violations. Thanks, everyone. Always a pleasure.